It was a scorching hot morning when Archibald heard the desperate screams coming from Willow Creek. The 65-year-old man was in the barn tending to the cows when those blood-curdling cries reached his ears like a distress call that froze the blood in his veins. He dropped everything he was doing and ran as fast as his aching legs could carry him, his heart pounding erratically in his chest. The property was located in the remote countryside of Montana, far from everything and everyone, where Archibald's only companions were the animals and the sound of water cascading over the rocks of Willow Creek, which ran at the edge of his land. He had lived there alone for over 10 years, since his wife passed away, and his children scattered across the globe, leaving the old man to fend for himself with the heavy farm work. When he arrived panting at the edge of the creek, what he saw froze the blood in his veins. A young woman with a huge pregnant belly was struggling in the icy water, fighting desperately not to drown. Her arms moved weakly, as if she could no longer fight against the current that was trying to pull her to the bottom of the turbulent waters. Archibald was a suspicious man by nature, who didn't like strangers lurking around his property. He had been deceived many times in his life by people who took advantage of his good faith, and that's why he was always wary of anyone who showed up there. But at that moment, seeing a human being in distress, he didn't even take 2 seconds to think. The tough old coot kicked off his boots and jumped into the icy water without thinking twice, feeling the shock of the cold on his skin and the force of the current trying to carry him along. The water was deeper than it looked, and he had to swim with difficulty to get close to the woman. She was almost fainting when he managed to grab her arm and pull her towards the shallower side. It was a heck of a struggle to get her out of the water. The heavy pregnant belly made everything difficult, and the girl was limp as a wet rag, almost unconscious. Archibald used all the strength he still had in his body to drag her to the shore, where he managed to lay her on the grass and see that she was still breathing, even if very weakly. The woman must have been around 25 years old, with brown hair plastered to her face, soaked clothes clinging to her body. She was pale as candle wax, her lips slightly purple from cold and exhaustion. But what caught Archibald's attention the most was a strange scar she had on her right arm, a mark that looked like a drawing, as if someone had burned or cut her skin on purpose to make that symbol he had never seen in his life. He tried to wake her up by shaking her gently, but the woman only moaned softly without opening her eyes. The huge belly showed that the child could be born at any moment, and there in the middle of the woods, far from any medical help, the situation was more complicated than he could imagine. There was no telephone on the farm, the nearest neighbor lived more than 15 miles away, and the road was so bad that taking her to town would take more than an hour. Archibald picked up the woman in his arms, feeling the weight of her belly and the soaked clothes. She was heavy, but he was still strong, used to the hard work of farm life. He carried her to the house, climbing the slope slowly so as not to trip and drop them both on the ground. The house was simple, made of stone and wood, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen and a living room where he spent the nights alone watching television or reading some old book. It had been a long time since anyone other than him had entered there, and suddenly having a stranger unconscious in his home stirred up all his instincts of distrust. He took her to the guest room, where there was a bed that hadn't been used for years. He changed her wet clothes for a nightgown of his deceased wife that he still kept in the closet, trying not to look too much at the woman's body to respect her dignity. He covered her with thick blankets to warm her and stood there, not knowing what to do. He was a man used to solving problems alone, but that situation was beyond anything he had ever faced. A pregnant woman, unconscious, who had appeared out of nowhere in his creek, without documents, without anything that could indicate who she was or where she had come from. How had she ended up there? Why was she alone? And most importantly, what was he going to do with her? Watch until the end. You won't regret it. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. He prepared a very hot tea and tried to make her drink a few drops, but the woman remained unconscious. The hours passed, and Archibald stayed there by her side, observing her breathing, praying that nothing serious would happen. From time to time she moved a little, mumbled words he couldn't understand, but didn't wake up properly. When the sun began to set, he began to worry for real. What if she didn't wake up? What if something happened to the child? What if someone showed up looking for her? Thousands of questions swirled in the old farmer's head, who couldn't stop thinking about all the complications that situation could bring to his peaceful life. It was when, in the middle of the night, she opened her eyes for the first time. Archibald was dozing in the chair next to the bed when he heard her groan louder. He woke up startled and saw that she was trying to sit on the bed, her eyes wide with fear, looking at him as if he were a ghost. "Easy there, miss, easy," he said in a low voice, trying to calm her down. "You were drowning in the creek. I pulled you out of the water." She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out of her throat. Archibald brought fresh water and helped her drink slowly. When she managed to swallow a little, she tried to speak again. I don't remember," she murmured, her voice weak and confused. "Don't remember anything. Who are you? Where am I?" And it was at that moment that Archibald realized that the problems had only just begun. The woman didn't remember anything, not even her own name, or how she had ended up there. And in her belly, a child that could be born at any moment without anyone knowing who the father was, or what the story behind it all was. The first few days were the most difficult that Archibald had ever faced in his life. The woman was kind of dazed, lost, as if she were in a world she couldn't understand. She woke up startled in the middle of the night, screaming things that didn't make sense, and he had to run to her room to try to calm her down. It was heartbreaking to see a human being so lost, so aimless. She couldn't remember her own name, or where she had come from, or how she had ended up in that creek. Archibald tried to ask simple questions, but she just shook her head, her eyes full of tears of frustration. The only thing she remembered were loose pieces, as if her memory was a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "I remember rain," she said, her voice still weak. "A lot of rain and fear, a lot of fear." She ran her hand over her large belly and sighed. "I remember running, but I don't know from what." Archibald, who had become a tough man after so many disappointments in life, felt his heart squeeze every time he saw her trying to force her memory. It was as if her mind had closed to protect something very bad, something that hurt too much to be remembered. The pregnancy was advanced, very advanced. Archibald didn't understand anything about pregnant women, but by her belly you could see that the child could be born at any moment. He tried to convince her to go to the hospital in town, but she was terrified just thinking about leaving the farm. "I can't leave here," she said, holding his arm tightly. "I can't. They'll find me." "Who will find you?" he asked, but she just shook her head and cried. It was strange how she seemed to know things about farm work without ever having been there before. On the third day, when she could already walk a little, she went to the barn and calmed a wild cow that had been stressed for weeks. She ran her hand over the animal's muzzle and murmured soft words, and the cow calmed down instantly. "How do you know how to do that?" asked Archibald, impressed. She looked at her own hands as if she was seeing them for the first time. "I don't know. I just know." Archibald was a practical man who didn't believe in mystery or strange things, but he had to admit that this woman had something different. The animals liked her, the plants seemed to grow better when she passed by, and even the weather seemed calmer since she had arrived. But what bothered him the most was the scar on her arm. When he asked about it, the woman became even more confused, ran her fingers over the mark and said that it hurt, not on the skin, but inside, as if it were a pain of the soul. "Looks like someone did this on purpose," said Archibald, examining the mark. "It's not an accident scar." She shrank back when he said that. "I don't want to remember. I can't remember." At the end of the first week, Archibald made a decision that would change everything. He decided that he wasn't going to try to find out who she was or where she had come from, at least not until she was ready to remember on her own. The woman needed peace, safety, and for some reason that he didn't understand himself, he felt that it was his responsibility to give that to her. "I need to call you something," he said one morning while they were having coffee in the kitchen. "Can't go on without a name." She thought for a moment, stirring her cup with both hands. "Mary. I think I can be Mary." It was a simple, common name that didn't say anything about who she really was. But for Archibald, at that moment, Mary was perfect. Mary adapted to the farm routine as if she had been born there. She woke up early, helped in the kitchen, took care of the chickens, talked to the dogs. Archibald, who for years had lived in absolute silence, began to get used to the sound of footsteps in the house, the sound of pots in the kitchen, a female voice humming softly while doing chores. It was strange how her presence changed everything. The house that before seemed like a tomb now had life, had movement, had human warmth. Archibald found himself smiling for no reason, something he hadn't done for years. But at the same time, he felt a weight on his conscience, a constant worry that someone might show up looking for her. On the 10th day, that worry became reality. Archibald was fixing the fence of the pasture when he saw two men approaching on the road. They were strange types, dressed in suits in the middle of the countryside, driving a black car that kicked up dust on the dirt road. His heart raced, and he instinctively ran to the house to warn Mary. "There are people coming," he said, panting. "Two men in suits." Mary turned pale, as if she had seen a ghost. She began to tremble, ran her hands over her belly and looked towards the door like a cornered animal. "They found me," she whispered. "I knew they would find me." "Who are they?" asked Archibald, but Mary had already hidden in the room. The men knocked on the door forcefully. Archibald opened it and saw two guys in sunglasses with unfriendly faces. "Good afternoon," said the taller one. "We are looking for a woman who disappeared a few weeks ago. Young, pregnant, brown hair. Someone said she might have appeared around here." Archibald felt his blood run cold, but maintained the face of a local who doesn't understand anything. "Pregnant woman? No one has appeared around here, boss. Only I live in this house, and it's been a long time since I've seen even the shadow of a woman." The men exchanged glances. "Are you sure?" "Because whoever gave us the information said they were sure she came to this region." "Look, my friend," said Archibald, crossing his arms. "I know every inch of this land. If a woman had appeared around here, I would know. But you can take a look around if you want. I have nothing to hide." The men stayed around the house for a few more minutes, looking around, asking questions about roads and neighbors. Archibald answered everything with the calmness of someone who has nothing to fear, but inside he was seething with nervousness. When they finally left, Archibald ran to the room where Mary was hidden. He found her huddled in the corner, crying softly, her hands trembling on her belly. "They're gone," he said, sitting next to her. "They didn't see you." "They'll be back," she murmured. "They always come back. They won't give up until they find me." "Who are they, Mary? What did they do to you?" She looked up at him, and Archibald saw there a fear so deep, so desperate, that he wanted to hug her and promise that nothing bad was going to happen. "I can't remember," she said, "but I know they are dangerous. I know they did bad things to me, and I know that if they find me—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Archibald made the most important decision of his life at that moment. "Then they won't find you. You stay here with me and I'll protect you. No matter who they are, they won't touch you." Mary looked at him as if she were seeing an angel. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Archibald thought about the question. Why even? Maybe because for years he hadn't felt like he had a purpose in life. Maybe because seeing her there, lost and scared, awakened in him a protective instinct that he thought had died along with his wife. Or maybe because, deep down, he was also alone and needed someone to take care of. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said, "and because you don't deserve to go through this alone." That night, Mary went into labor. The storm arrived at the same time that the labor pains began, as if the sky wanted to announce that something big was going to happen that night. The south wind hit the house hard, making the windows tremble, and the branches of the trees hit the roof like desperate fingers trying to get in. Archibald had never seen Mary as scared as she was at that moment. "It can't be now," she repeated, holding her belly with both hands. "It can't be now, not here." But nature doesn't ask permission from anyone, and the contractions began to come stronger and stronger, closer and closer together. Archibald, who had helped hundreds of cows give birth in his life, knew that there was no way to stop what had begun. The child wanted to be born and wasn't going to wait to get to the hospital. "Stay calm, Mary," he said, trying to look more confident than he really was. "Everything will be all right." But inside, the old farmer was terrified. One thing was to help an animal give birth, quite another was to deliver a woman, especially in the middle of a storm, far from any medical help. If something went wrong, if the child came in the wrong position, if Mary had any complications, he wouldn't know what to do. The light began to flicker because of the storm, and Archibald ran to light candles and kerosene lamps. The house became kind of gloomy, with the flames dancing on the walls and creating strange shadows that made everything seem even more haunted. The sound of the rain on the tin roof was deafening, muffling Mary's moans of pain. Archibald boiled water, got clean towels, and prepared everything he thought he would need. He remembered the births of the cows, how nature usually knew what to do, and tried to convince himself that with people it shouldn't be much different. But when he saw Mary writhing in pain in bed, sweating cold, and screaming with each contraction, he realized that he was far beyond his abilities. "It hurts a lot," she moaned, grabbing the sheet so hard that the knuckles of her fingers turned white. "It hurts much more than I remembered." "Do you remember other births?" asked Archibald, surprised. Mary stopped screaming for a second and looked at him with wide eyes, as if she had been startled by her own words. I don't know why I said that. I don't remember having had other children. But there was no time to think much about it, because the contractions came back with full force. Mary began to scream in a way that Archibald had never heard in his life, a scream that came from the bottom of her soul, mixed with despair and with a pain that went far beyond the physical. And that's when things got really strange. At the height of the pain, Mary began to speak in a language that Archibald had never heard in his life. They weren't words in Portuguese or Spanish or any language he knew. It was as if she was speaking in a very ancient, very distant tongue, with sounds that seemed to come from another world. "Kalara neth vuin, kalara neth," she screamed, her eyes rolling back, as if she was seeing things that weren't there. Ered luin naur." Archibald froze. The words came out of her mouth with a force and certainty that didn't match the lost and memoryless woman he knew. It was as if another person had taken over her body, someone who knew things Mary didn't. "Mary, can you hear me?" he tried, but she continued to scream in that strange language. "Girth and Morgoth Nar, Girth and Morgoth Nar." The words came out like a desperate prayer, or perhaps like a cry for help directed at someone or something that only she could see. The storm became even stronger, as if it was responding to her screams. The lightning began to strike closer, illuminating the entire house for a few seconds and making shadows dance on the walls. Archibald began to sweat, not only because of the responsibility of the birth, but because of the fear of what was happening to Mary. During a particularly strong contraction, she grabbed his arm with a force that didn't seem human and looked him in the eyes. But it was no longer the look of the Mary he knew. It was the look of someone much older, much wiser, someone who had seen terrible things and was trying to warn about some danger. "They're coming," she said in a different voice, deeper, more profound. They come with fire and darkness. The mark calls them. What mark, Mary? What are you talking about? She raised her right arm where the strange scar was. The mark seemed to be glowing in a faint light, pulsing as if it had a life of its own. Archibald blinked, thinking it was his imagination, but he swore he saw the scar move, writhing like a snake under the skin. "The Storm's daughter," Mary murmured. "The Storm's daughter will protect, will hide, will—" And she fell back on the bed, returning to normal contractions as if nothing had happened. Archibald was so scared that he almost ran away. But he heard the cry of a child and realized that, in the midst of all that madness, the girl had been born. A small but healthy little girl, crying loudly, her little lungs working perfectly. He picked up the child with trembling hands, cut the umbilical cord, as he had seen done with calves, and cleaned her with a soft towel. She was a perfect little doll, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see things beyond what a newborn should be able to see. When he placed the girl on Mary's chest, something happened that he would never forget. The storm stopped suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The wind stopped blowing, the rain stopped falling, and an absolute silence took over the night. It was a strange, heavy silence, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Mary looked at her daughter with eyes full of tears, and Archibald saw that she had returned to normal, that she didn't remember anything she had said during the birth. "She's beautiful," Mary whispered. "What are we going to call her?" Archibald thought of the strange words she had screamed, the mark that had glowed on her arm, the storm that had stopped at the moment the girl was born. He also thought of the words she had said, "They come with fire and darkness." "How about Hope?" he suggested. "Hope is a pretty name." Mary smiled for the first time since she had arrived at the farm. "Hope. I like it. Hope Mary." But while Mary slept with her daughter on her chest, Archibald stayed awake all night, looking out the window and thinking about everything that had happened. The words in a strange language, the mark that had glowed, the storm that had stopped at the moment of birth, and mainly thinking about what Mary had said. They come with fire and darkness. Who were they? And why did the mark on her arm seem to have some connection with these people? Archibald had the feeling that the birth of little Hope had awakened something, had sent a signal to someone or something that was looking for Mary. The next day, when the sun rose beautiful and clear, as if the storm of the previous night had been just a bad dream, Archibald woke up to a strange noise outside. It was the sound of cars approaching on the dirt road. 3 black cars, with tinted windows, were coming slowly towards the farm. Archibald felt the blood run cold in his veins. There were too many cars, too many people to be a social visit. And something in the way they approached, slowly and threateningly, made him understand that the problems had only just begun. He ran to the room where Mary was sleeping with the baby. He shook her gently to wake her up. "Mary, wake up. There are people coming. A lot of people." She opened her eyes and immediately understood that something was wrong. She squeezed her daughter against her chest and looked at him with that same desperate fear that he had seen on the day she woke up for the first time. "How many?" she asked. 3 cars, maybe 10 people." Mary closed her eyes, and a tear ran down her face. They sensed it. When she was born, they sensed it. Sensed what? The mark, Archibald. The mark called them. It was then that Archibald looked at her arm and saw that the scar had changed. Now it had the perfect shape of a star, and it was glowing in a faint but constant light, as if it were a beacon, sending signals to those who knew how to read them. The cars stopped in front of the house, and Archibald saw men in suits getting out of them. They weren't the same 2 that had come before. They were others, more dangerous, with faces that wouldn't take no for an answer. And worst of all, one of them was carrying a strange machine in his hand, with flashing lights that beeped louder and louder as it approached the house. The men approached the house slowly, like wolves circling their prey. Archibald grabbed the old shotgun he kept behind the door, but he knew that against so many it wouldn't do much good. Mary was in the room with the baby, trembling like a leaf in the wind, but there was something different about her now. After the birth, after screaming in that strange language, she seemed to be remembering pieces of her life. The man carrying the strange device stopped right in front of the house. The machine beeped uncontrollably. The lights flashed crazily, as if it had found exactly what it was looking for. Archibald opened the door before they knocked, showing that he wasn't afraid, even if inside he was dying of nervousness. "Good morning," said the oldest man in the group, a guy in his 50s with grey hair, expensive suit. "My name is Dr. Alistair Fremont. We are looking for a patient of ours who escaped from a very important medical treatment." "I already told the others who came here," Archibald replied. "There is no woman in this house." Dr. Fremont smiled, but it was a cold smile, without joy. "Mr. Archibald Peterson, we know she is here. This device detects a very specific type of radiation that only she emits, and besides..." He made a sign, and two men brought an older woman that Archibald immediately recognized. It was Mrs. Gladys, the neighbor who lived on the nearest farm, 15 miles away. She had a bruised face, her eyes swollen from crying so much. "I'm sorry, Archibald," she said in a trembling voice. "They forced me. They said they were going to hurt my grandson if I didn't tell them where she was." Archibald felt the world collapse. Mrs. Gladys had seen Mary a few times when she came to get eggs at the farm. She was a good woman, hard-working, who would never turn anyone in out of malice. But when they threaten the ones we love, anyone can break. "Where is she?" asked Dr. Fremont, losing patience. It was then that Mary appeared at the door of the room, carrying the baby in her arms. She no longer had that look of a lost and scared woman. There was a determination in her eyes, a strength that Archibald had never seen before. "You don't need to threaten innocent people," she said, looking straight into the doctor's eyes. "You came after me, so here I am." Dr. Fremont looked at her as if he was seeing a ghost. "Valentina Hope Gutierrez. After 2 years of looking for you." Archibald froze. Valentina. That was her real name. And from the way the man spoke, there was a much more complicated story behind it all. "My name is Mary now," she said, her voice firm, "and this is my daughter Hope. What do you want?" "You know very well what we want. You are the only person in the world capable of finding underground water wells with 100% accuracy. Your family has had this gift for generations. And we invested millions of dollars in the project before you decided to run away." Archibald began to understand pieces of the story. The way Mary, or Valentina, managed to calm the animals, how she knew where to dig to find water, how the plants seemed to grow better near her. It wasn't magic. It was a family gift, a skill that these people wanted to use to make money. "I already said I wasn't going to work for you anymore," said Valentina. "Not after discovering what you do to the poor communities that live on top of the aquifers." Dr. Fremont took a step forward. "You have no choice. We have signed contracts. And now we have something much more valuable." He pointed to the baby. "Your daughter inherited the gift. We felt her energy the moment she was born, with 2 people like you working for us." "Never," said Valentina, squeezing the child against her chest. It was then that Archibald understood everything. The mark on her arm wasn't a common scar. It was a tattoo made with special ink that reacted when she used the gift of finding water. The company had marked her as if she were cattle, to be able to track her wherever she went. "And if I don't go with you?" asked Valentina. Dr. Fremont looked at Archibald and then at Mrs. Gladys. "You are smart. You know very well what will happen to the people who helped you." Valentina closed her eyes, and Archibald saw a tear run down her face. 2 years running, 2 years trying to escape, and in the end she had to surrender to protect those she cared about. It was the most refined cruelty he had ever seen in his life. "All right," she said. "I'll go with you, but leave them alone. Of course, said Dr. Fremont, smiling. Deal. But Archibald wasn't going to let things end like this. He had lived 70 years in this world, had seen a lot of cowardice and a lot of evil, but he had also learned that sometimes a person needs to do the right thing, even if it costs dearly. Hold on, he said, placing himself between Valentina and the men. I don't think you understood something. Dr. Fremont looked at him mockingly. What is it, old man? This woman and this child are under my protection, and in this land, that means something. Your protection, Doctor. Fremont laughed. You are a broke farmer, with debts up to your neck. What can you do against us? Archibald smiled. I can make you understand how justice works in Montana. It was then that the sound of horses and pickup trucks approaching made everyone look at the road. Archibald smiled even more. During the night, while taking care of Valentina's birth, he had sent a message to his compadre Hank, who in turn notified other neighbors. And in Montana, when a neighbor asks for help, people come in droves. 20 men on horseback and in pickup trucks arrived at the farm, all armed, all with faces that didn't come to play. They were ranch hands, farmers, people of the land who had known Archibald for decades and knew that he was a man of his word. Dr. Fremont turned pale. This won't change anything. We have lawyers, we have money, we have influence. Doctor, said Hank, dismounting from his horse with the agility of someone who had spent his life on the back of animals. You are in a land where a lawyer doesn't solve things. Here, what solves things is the word of an honorable man, and Archibald is one of the most honorable I know. The situation had turned completely. The men in suits, used to intimidating people in big cities, found themselves surrounded by real Montanans, people who weren't afraid of anything and who protected their own with tooth and nail. Valentina, said Archibald, tell them the whole truth. And she told them. She told how her family had the gift of finding water for generations, how her great-grandfather had helped drill the first artesian wells in Montana. She told how this company discovered her family's gift and kidnapped first her father, then her mother, forcing them to work to locate aquifers that were then commercially exploited, leaving the local communities without water. She told how she had tried to escape when she found out she was pregnant, how she had been pursued to that creek where Archibald found her, and how the company used people with the gift until they died of exhaustion, because finding underground water drained all the vital energy of those who had this ability. They killed my father and my mother, she said, her voice choked. They made them work until their last breath, and they want to do the same thing to me and my daughter. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. The Montanans exchanged glances, and Archibald saw in their eyes the same indignation he felt. People who exploit the weakest, who take advantage of sacred gifts to earn dirty money, didn't deserve respect. Dr. Fremont tried to argue, talked about contracts, about laws, about lawsuits, but Hank cut off his speech. Doctor, I'm going to explain how things work around here. You're going to take your men, get into your fancy cars and leave. If you show up around here again, or if any harm comes to Archibald, to the woman or to the child, you are going to get to know a justice that you don't learn in college. Is that a threat? That's a promise. Dr. Fremont realized he had lost. Against money and influence, he knew how to defend himself, but against the solidarity of an entire community, against people willing to give their lives for what they believed in, he had no weapons. This won't stay like this, he muttered, signaling for the men to return to the cars. Yes, it will, said Archibald, because now Valentina is no longer alone. She has a family, she has a community, she has people who will protect her and her daughter until the end of time. When the cars disappeared in the dust of the road, Valentina fell into Archibald's arms, crying with relief. 2 years running, 2 years afraid, and finally she had found a place where she could be at peace. Why did you do this for me? She asked. Archibald looked at the little child sleeping in her arms, then at the neighbors who had left everything to come help, then at Valentina, who was no longer a nameless stranger, but real family. Because sometimes God puts the right people in the right place at the right time, he said. You brought life to this house, brought joy to this land, and little Hope, she will grow up free. She will use her gift to help people, not to enrich bandits. Valentina smiled through her tears. How do you know she inherited the gift? Archibald pointed to the well that had dried up 5 years ago, and that since the baby's birth was gushing crystal-clear water. She was born, and the whole earth woke up. The plants are greener, the animals are calmer, even the weather seems nicer. This girl is going to be special, but she's going to be special in the right way. And that's how Valentina Hope Gutierrez became Mary Peterson, Archibald's wife of the heart, mother of little Hope, and the woman who brought life back to Peterson Farm. Her gift didn't disappear, but now it was used to help the neighbors find water for their properties, to help the community grow and prosper. The mark on her arm stopped glowing the day she decided to stay, as if the gift itself knew that it had found the right place, the right people, the right life. Archibald, who started the story as a lonely and suspicious man, discovered that the heart always has room for more love, more family, more happiness. And Valentina, who lost everything she had in the world, found something much more valuable, a real home where she could be herself without fear. Little Hope grew up free in the Montana countryside, playing among the animals, learning that the gift of finding water was a blessing to be shared, not a burden to be carried alone. And when she grew up, she became the best well driller in the state, helping entire communities gain access to clean, abundant water. Peterson Farm, which was almost lost due to debt, became prosperous again. Not because of the money the gift brought, but because of the happiness that a united family can build when they work together, when they protect each other, when they understand that the best things in life are priceless. And every night, when the sun set behind the rolling hills, Archibald, Mary, and little Hope would sit on the porch of the house, listening to the sound of Willow Creek where it all began, knowing that they had found something that many people look for their entire lives without finding, a place to belong, people who love them for real, and the peace of those who know they made the right choices at the right time. The storm had passed, the sun had returned to shine, and the Peterson family, because everyone had adopted that name with pride, knew that whatever happened, they would face it together, protected by the strongest love that exists, the love of those who choose to be family, even without having the same blood running through their veins.